I just, this is our first time in person meeting each other.
Yes.
We've had the honor to share spaces via the web, but what a joy it is to sit in your space and to be with you. I feel so honored to see, because when I sit, it lets me know that all that we have gone through in my decade and in my time as an elder, it lets me know when I see someone such as yourself, it lets me know that you are a shining example of what Pride is all about.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It makes my heart fill with joy. So let me just dwell in it, after I read the entire book. So, I was on it, honey. I was reading it between, my lunch hour, on the bus, on the subway, standing at the bus stop. I was just I couldn't put it down. And how wonderful it was that you saw fit to honor our trans community, especially when we talk about film and television, the importance of why representation matters. It is so important. So I'm just going to say, what made you feel the need to create this book?
Thank you for that question. Thank y'all for being here. So the book kind of started back in, I want to say 2014, 2015. It's in the book, the actual date. I have horrible memory, which makes writing a book very hard, by the way. But it started back then. I was working at the Los Angeles Times. This was post-transgender tipping point. This was after Laverne Cox. This was right before the season 2 premiere of Transparent, the Amazon show. And for whatever reason, I was like, I want to do like this timeline of trans representation. And I couldn't find a resource. One did not exist. And so I reached out to Nick Adams at GLAAD, who's been, spearheading their effort around trans representation. And he gave me his own personal list. And so many trans folks, we have our own personal list of visibility and representation and history. So he gave me his, and then I built it out from there. And I just said to myself, this is really interesting, because people feel like we dropped onto the face of the earth with Laverne Cox, right, on Orange is the New Black. But we as trans people, we as gender expansive people have always existed in every single society and culture and community on this globe, right, since the beginning of time. And so part of doing the book was about pushing back against that idea, right, that we are just here now, right, and, trying to honor and uplift some of the folks who came before us.
And that's important, because for this generation now, everybody clicks on and they see Pose and they see Legendary, and they just think we have arrived.
Listen, okay.
When Go Forth, there were so many folks that if you pick up the book, you honor so many people, because whenever I'm in spaces and I talk to young people about the importance of knowing your history, and trans folks, when I mention Sir Lady Java, please research her. Groundbreaking, trailblazing, amazing, and still with us in her 80s and still Absolutely. Vibrant and fabulous. It is so important that they just know that there were so many folks before them, and so many people just think like, boom, Laverne and Janet just landed, and bam, the trans community just, but honey, it was the girls on the films and the television who were in there in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s in magazines and were passing and getting through, and you never knew.
You never knew.
You never knew, like the one particular actress who was in the Cheetah Girls movie.
Yes, Sandra Caldwell,
yes.
who's also still with us, living, right? I talk in the book about the Cheetah Girls. I love the Cheetah Girls. The first one in particular. The second one's cute, but the first one in particular. But the character of Drinka Champagne is played by Sandra Caldwell. Sandra Caldwell is a black trans woman who lived what we call stealth, right, for a long period of her life, acting in a variety of things that you all have seen, and, couldn't, right, disclose her identity. Didn't feel like she could because of the world that we live in, because of how opportunities, right, get cut. in half, if that, for Black trans women specifically. And then she saw Laverne Cox, right? And she was like, "Oh wow, we can own our identities in these ways publicly." Right. And so when I found out that information, I was like, oh, maybe that's why I really like the Cheetah Girls. Right. Maybe it wasn't, Raven Simone's queer energy. Maybe it was this Black trans woman who was, busting up the spot, in the ways that she was.
And she was. When she disclosed, I always felt that something about her was so unique that, beside how striking and beautiful, I just felt her energy. And when she was giving, I'm family, I was giving, I knew it was more to that.
Amen.
But when we talk about, do you feel there is a disconnect of trans images, especially when it comes to people of color?
I think so, right? And I don't, y'all should think the same if you watching what I'm watching. I think we look at a show like Pose, right, and Legendary, and even Laverne on Orange is the New Black, and we're like, ooh, we're doing good on the representation thing, right? But when you take a look at the actual images of trans people on screen, they still, hew to these very specific tropes and stereotypes, right? Which is not to say that, for example, right, trans people, largely trans women, right, are, not engaging in sex work, because that's how a lot of the characters are. They're connected to sex work in some way, shape, or form. They, often are about our tragedies as trans people. They hyper-focus on our transitions as trans people. Even a show like Pose hews closely to some of those stereotypes, even as it is historic, right, in the ways that it is also historic. And so when we're talking about this particular moment of visibility, I like to say that we are the most visible we've ever been as a community, but we're also the most vulnerable we've ever been as a community, right? Having all of these images on screen, have led to us being a target in so many different ways, legislatively, I'm speaking. And then what do we then do with that? Right? Because yes, representation absolutely matters, right? It allows so many of us to see ourselves. But representation without protection still leaves us
vulnerable.
Absolutely.
It leaves us, and it leaves those who do not like us or do not celebrate us. They use those images to attack us. And that is so funny that film can be a double sword that cuts both ways, because they'll get you, and the wokes that don't like us be like, well, look at those images, they're corrupting our children, which they are beautiful, wonderful, amazing images of who we are. Folks who want to work, want to breathe, want to have normal lives. And what they do is when it becomes very fearful when they see trans folks on film and their lives are just like those who hate us, and that similarity is frightening.
But that's what, there is a concerted effort. I'm gonna get on a soapbox just for a little minute. There's a concerted effort playing out right now in state legislatures across this country, right? An intentional campaign, right, to make folks believe that we aren't normal, that we are different than them, that we are predators, that we want to replace women, all of the rhetoric that we hear. And people, what they're doing is they're exploiting folks' general gender ignorance, right, in their favor, right? And we are the ones who are now impacted by it, right? And I like to say that it also starts with a lot of the images that we see on screen, right? You listen to what these folks are saying in these state legislatures, and they're talking about us being predators. They're talking about us trying to deceive people. They're talking about us, trying to groom folks. And I often say to myself, where did they get that from? Because there are no examples of this behavior in real life. So where did they get it from? Well, you must have seen Psycho or Silence of the Lambs, or some image, right, of gender expansiveness in culture that led you to believe that those of us who are just trying to exist, right, are somehow trying to enact harm, on the rest of the community. And it's because they saw it on screen first.
And it's so sad. Child, you know we could go on. So I'm gonna pull back. That's why I register to vote.
Amen.
Register to vote. That's how we change things. Make sure you are voting, and wherever you live, that's how we can change things. Because if we don't know the power of our vote, let me just be I'm gonna get on the soapbox too, child. Let me just get on the soapbox. When you are angry and upset about something and you want to change things, you are the change. It starts with you. So if you don't register to vote, you don't get involved on the local level to the national level, and if you just sit at home and say, well, I'm not going to vote for the president because I don't like neither one of them, the other team wins. So you are part of the problem when you don't vote. So folks who sit at home and complain about everything, start getting involved. And register people to vote. Take your neighbors to vote. Take your grandma to vote. Take a bunch of people. Take the gays. We love a busload of the gays. Come on, honey. Come on in and celebrate our rainbowness, honey. And, just be, so there are so many things. When I read your book, it just gave me hope. It gave me hope of, even when we think about when we turn on the news and listen to stuff, I read this book and I just was taking a journey. I was just smiling and laughing and celebrating all of these amazing, phenomenal trans folks in film and television. Because I remember as a child, whenever the images of someone who was very feminine, was always, they made us the villain. And then the ones who were on film that I knew that was trans, that was breaking grounds and turning it, and was on doing the black exploitation film. When I saw all of my sisters in those moments and they were kicking and doing judo chops and beating up the bad guys, I was given, if only they knew. And then when it came to a point when these people could break those chains and say, this is who I was, or this is who she was or who he was, and realize these folks were trans. And then they were like, wait a minute, I was voting for them. I was celebrating them. She was my hero in that film. And then it says, it's okay. It's okay to celebrate them. We're human.
We're completely human, right? So many people believe they have never met, so many of you believe that you have never met trans people. And I like to say that, it's not that you haven't met trans people. It's that you have not created a safe enough environment around you for the trans people who are already in your community to tell you their truth, right? And so what are we doing as individuals to make sure that folks can tell us their truth so that we can show up for them in the ways that they need, right? Not enough people do, that self-introspection. Self-introspection is y'all know what I mean. Anyway, but like not enough people are doing that type of work. And I think that type of work is necessary to get us to, this promised land that we say we want to be in terms of equality, if you will.
And that's important. I think about, I'll give you a prime example. Someone such as myself, I move through this world in the human experience. So if you call me mother, father, sister, brother, I answer it all. When folks say, Racine, how do you identify? I'm a human being. And you can't trust me. I've heard it all. So whatever you throw at me, you are not going to offend me. Trust me. Darling, you don't have that power over my feelings enough to insult me, to make me upset. So I allow folks to feel comfortable enough. Like today I was at the bus stop, and two men came to the bus stop, and they were having a conversation, and they said, oh, ma'am, can I sit here? I said, sure, make yourself comfortable, young man. So we start talking, and somehow they were just talking about, oh, it's Pride. Those LGBT folks are in town. I said, really? I said, isn't that something? So he was like, well, my sister's son, he came out as gay, but he was married to a woman, and then he came out, and then he became trans. I said, oh, really? So I just let him feel comfortable enough to tell me all this. And I said, well, you know what? You know, as he was telling me his story and the man was telling me his story, and I said, well, you know, I'm part of that LGBT community. And they were like, oh, really? So, you know, I guess they were reading something else and you know, they felt comfortable. And as soon as I said, well, let me just educate you. So I said, you know, we were sat and we talked about community and we talked about family. We talked about the neighborhood. And as soon as they got comfortable enough, that's when I just said, well, you know, let me tell them my tea. In case you don't know, because, you know, they were giving me little old lady at the bus stop, but I'll take that. You know, I'll take little old lady at the bus stop. If you're going to move over and give me a seat, honey, I'm going to take it. You know, so I just, and it's funny. So in those moments that many of our trans folks have the ability to educate people with sometimes outing themselves or outing themselves. You know, folks have the ability to what we call pass. And when they are passing, you never know, because my girlfriends are turning it in 2023. And they go to their job and they just listen to folks say things about, oh, you know, it's that Pride Month. And then they'll say, let me educate them and let me give them some knowledge and some history and make them feel comfortable enough that I'm gonna hit them with something and then I'm gonna tell them something and then I'm gonna walk away and leave it with them. And let them just simmer in it, because then, you know, they understand everybody is part of that human experience. And when you talk about, especially how films educate and how books and all of that just takes a moment to educate us. But you say in your book, you share trans elders who inspire you. Could you share just a few of those folks? Because I think it's so important that people know.
Yeah, one of the names that I always mention is Monica Roberts. Monica Roberts wasn't an actress. Thank you. Monica Roberts wasn't an actress, wasn't a Hollywood type. She was a journalist and a black trans woman, and she had a blog called Trans Griot. And on that blog, she would document black trans life. Her black trans life, what was going on social media. You know, she would do football recaps, which, you know, trans people like sports too, I guess. And I met her for the first time at an NABJ convention. NABJ is the National Association of Black Journalists. I'm Region 4 director right now in that organization. Thank you. And she was a person who showed me, right, that I could be me and also a journalist at the same time, right? She and her example is one of the reasons why I'm so involved in that organization to this day. And, you know, when we as a journalism and media industry get to a point where we are no longer misgendering trans people in their death, we will owe it to Monica Roberts, right? Single-handedly. And so Monica Roberts is one name that is always important for me to mention because representation is not just a film and television thing, right? It's also about, you know, the girls on the street, you know, doing what they do. And then another name I would lift up is Ajita Wilson, who was a black trans woman, an adult film star, who was a Jet Beauty of the Week back in the day. A black trans woman as a Jet Beauty of the Week. Now, for the white people in the room, Jet Magazine was a legendary black magazine. You know, just in case y'all don't know. And it was on everybody's coffee table along with Essence and Ebony. And the Jet Beauty of the Week is what, you know, dudes would rip out the Jet Beauty of the Week and put it up on their wall like you might do with a Britney Spears poster or something, you know? And so to have a black trans woman, of course they did not know she was trans. It was not discovered or found out, quote unquote, that she was trans until she died unceremoniously. But to have a black trans woman in her power, in her essence, right? In this particular role, in this black publication, considering the ways we as black people uplifted that publication and that feature in particular, is important, right? It's important for us to know that. One, because we, again, as trans people, have always existed in every culture and community on this globe since the beginning of time, right? But we are also Black. And I think oftentimes when people think about trans folks, when they think about queer folks, they often think of white people, right? But that robs us of such a rich history, right? In particular of Black trans excellence. And you mentioned earlier about, like, you know, young people, and we talked about the legislation. And one of the things that have been most motivating for me in the work that I do, as a journalist, as someone who has to cover these, you know, bills in the anti-trans legislation, is that knowing that I belong to a long line of what I call, can I curse? Where's Ryan? Yes, of Black trans bad bitches. You know, like that is you know, 'cause it's library. You got to ask these things.
Yes, you do.
You know?
Yes, you do.
You got to be careful.
But it's in a book. That word is in a book.
It is in plenty of books. It's in this one. But knowing that I belong to this long line of Black trans brilliance is motivating for me. It is energizing. And I hope that it can be energizing for the rest of the folks, right, who are also moving and navigating through this particular period in our history.
And that's so important. And I'm going to segue to the next question. Why is it so important when we talk about film and television that we must understand the importance of using trans actors?
So, you know, the whole conversation around authentic casting is a really interesting one, because there are people who believe that casting trans people to play trans characters, that trans actor is not acting. But yeah, let that rest with you, right? There are people who believe, and I know this because they have told me this, you know, I am a journalist. And so they have told me this, and they have used this as like a justification, for example, for why Michaela J. Rodriguez, for example, did not, quote unquote, deserve, you know, attention for her acting in Pose, or any of the other ladies and people in Pose, outside of Billy Porter. We can have that conversation later. But the reason why we need trans people playing trans characters is because it's important what happens once the director yells cut. It's important for the discourse that happens after the movie or the TV show is out there in the world. Because Jeffrey Tambor and Jared Leto and, you know, Eddie Redmayne, right, can take off the wig and the makeup and go on about their life, and they can perhaps advocate on behalf of trans lives, or they can just be lauded for
Everybody wave.
But they can take off the wig and still be lauded for this massive transformation that they have done, this great acting that they have done, but trans people aren't afforded the same. And the problem is, right, Laverne Cox is able to take the conversation around Black trans women being incarcerated a lot further, because she is a Black trans woman in community with Black trans people, right, who have been incarcerated, right? It allows the discourse that we say these films and TV shows are supposed to allow us to do. It allows it to hit in a very different way. It allows us as trans people to be part of the conversation and directing, right, the conversation as it relates to our lived experiences, right? We just breathe something different into those roles in a way that gets us toward this idea of, you know, humanizing trans folks. Because if all these men who are dressing up as women on screen are able to take it off, it makes people think that we're taking it off as well.
That we're just those who choose to be trans or
Doing too
trans-identify,
much.
that child, you just playing in your mother's clothes. You don't really want to be a woman. And people, I always say, when you welcome people to the table, it is important that table has proper representation, that everybody has a right at the table. And sometimes when I'm invited to a table, you get a little bit of everything. You know, folks don't know where to put me. It's okay. Just invite me there.
I know that's right.
You know, invite me there and I'm going to break the door down. But it's so important that when I sit and I see panels, I always say, well, where is the trans person? Where's the woman? Where's an elder? Where's someone under 25? Where is someone representing minorities in this country? Different groups of people that are part of the soup, that is all part of the pot, which is all part of the stew, which is all part of what we are supposed to have at the table. And too many times, folks, heterosexual white men make decisions and they have the power at the table and they don't want anybody else at that table because
Absolutely.
they'll be like, if you're not thinking like me, breathing like me, I don't want to hear it. And when folks are invited to the table and you have conversations, because sometimes I've gone into spaces that I know I wasn't welcome, but I kicked that door in and you have to come in. And you have to use that opportunity to say, you may not like me, you may not celebrate me, but you're going to respect me. And we're going to have a conversation about the understanding of what we go through. And then when people bond in the human experience, you cut, we all bleed red. You hurt, and people it starts breaking down walls. It starts breaking down folks in the human experience when they were like, well, you go through that, I go through that. You have that, I have that. So then, folks, there's no difference between someone who is not trans and someone who is trans. And then they say, well, child, sometimes folks don't want to look at it that way, you know, and it scares them. It's frightening to realize in the human experience, that's where we bond. That's where we find truth. That's where we find the understanding that we're all alike.
Can I add something to that? Because it is the straight white men, you know, they are the problem. But it is also the other people who want to be straight white men. Okay.
I love you.
I just want to, you know, call it like we see it, right? And a lot of them look like us.
Say that one more time. I think
A lot of them look like us, right? I just often think about the ways in which we, as black folks, end up reproducing the very harms that we say we're working against on very members of our community, right? And how we end up being machinations of white supremacy, even as we say we are pushing up against it, right? Again, self-introspection. I need to stop saying self-introspection because, you know, intro is, anyway. That's the copy editor in me. But yeah, we all have work to be doing, to be crafting this world that we say we want. And oftentimes we want to say, oh, it's that person over there. They're the ones who aren't inclusive. They're the ones who are the problem. And it's like, actually, you the problem too, sis, right? Because you, black woman, are also complicit in the homophobia and transphobia in our community.
Bam! Child, you threw that boomerang, baby, and it just it came right back. But that's a full circle moment. I always see this when I talk about the disservice that people do. And when I saw this, and I was almost going to wear it today, silence is violence. When people are quiet and don't say anything in spaces, And especially when our trans folks and our trans brothers and sisters are being killed at alarming rates and folks don't speak to their lives, it is a disservice. And that's the worst thing you can do by just being silent.
And being killed by black men.
Shawam. Child, you get out of my head. Get out of my head, sister.
I'm just saying.
You know, but yeah, I know we were gonna get deep, and we got deep. You know, but I'm gonna bring it back. In writing this book and going through your journey, what inspired you through this journey? What was the process like for you? Take us through that.
Oh, it was very long. I wrote it during the pandemic. I got the initial deal in, I want to say, March of 2021. The book was due in May of 2022. But just some behind the scenes on publishing. You know, you sign the deal or whatever, but you don't really sign the deal until they do the negotiation back and forth or whatever, you know, but you got an agreement. So like, yeah, you got a book deal, but the contract not signed until, you know, months later. And I'm a freelance journalist, okay? So I ain't got time to be dedicating on no book without no check, with all due respect. So I didn't get my first check until November, end of November of 2021. The book is due again in May of 2022. But you know, it's the holidays now. Ain't nobody working, including me. So I didn't start writing the book until January of 2022. I do not suggest that for anyone who is interested in writing a book. But it started out as this like more clinical approach to trans history on screen. It wasn't even intended to like be black per se. I mean, it would have been because of me, but it wasn't intended. It wasn't sold as that. I sold it as just this, you know, general look at trans lives on screen. And then while writing it, I was watching, in particular, Boys Don't Cry, Kimberly Pierce's film, which is deemed canonical for trans representation. And I was like, oh, this is deeply traumatic and it's very triggering. Why am I watching all these triggering movies to write this comprehensive look at trans images on screen? And so then I was like, okay, well, we're not doing that anymore, because it's not great for mental health, and you've got 3 months left to write this book, you know? And because I don't know how to say no, I was doing a whole lot of other things. I consulted on the last season of Legendary, so I was writing the book on set. It was real wild. I, again, would not suggest. And then ultimately, I decided that I would lean into like the uniqueness of my own personal experience as a non-binary trans person, as somebody who grew up in the South, as somebody who grew up in the church. And it became important to like write my own understanding of self and my own becoming into, you know, this history of trans folks on screen. And so it's the type of book where like you're gonna get, you know, some discussion about Boys Don't Cry or Psycho or Silence of the Lamb or Some Like It Hot or Mrs. Doubtfire or whatever. But we're also talking about drag in the book. We're also talking about how, you know, for me, Tyler Perry is the RuPaul of the church and nobody's talking about it. You know? And how though the types of jokes that we see lodged at a Madea or a Shanae or a Wanda or whomever, you know, character made famous by a black cis heterosexual largely man, those same jokes are the exact same jokes that we as trans women in femmes are dealing with in our community. And so how do we talk about these cultural productions realizing the very real violence that they're inflicting on us, and how does someone like myself, who I love a Tyler Perry play, the play specifically now, the movies, you know, but the plays, I mean, they're problematic and hallelujah and all of that, but, you know, I love good singing. Anyway, so I talk in the book also about that and those characters and why those types of characters, as well as your favorite social media influencer who's throwing on a wig for comedic purposes, in some ways, right, are complicit in the violence that we experience every day as black trans women and femmes. And so the hope is that folks will begin to think more expansively about how the images we see on screen are manifesting in our everyday lives, whether we know it or not.
Bam. I'm going to pose 2 more questions, then I'm going to open it up to the floor. If you would describe your book in 3 words, what would they be?
Country, because I write like I talk. This is a hard question. I'm like, all them words in there. You only want me to choose
Just
3?
3. Just choose 3.
I'd say country. I would say black, and I would say non-binary.
Okay. And the final question, before I pose some questions to the wonderful audience, and then afterwards we will transition over to the book signing. If there was a book made of your life story,
Oh my God, today.
what would it be called? Or would it be a miniseries or a film?
It would be a film that turns into a miniseries. Because you got to think longevity, IP, okay? It would be called The Fabulous Life of Slajan. Slajan is my alter ego and also the name of my production company. Check us out. But, I would want people to just, I've had a very interesting life thus far, and it's going to be even better. Stay tuned. But it has been a wonderful journey despite all of the foolishness. So I can't wait, because my life will be on the big screen in some capacity. Okay?
I can see it.
Can't you?
I can see it. I can see
Can't
it.
you? I
honey.
might have to play myself like Fantasia did in her Lifetime movie, which I don't mind. Make sure y'all see The Color Purple, December 25th.
I love it. But we are in the spirit of pride, and there's so many amazing stories and so many wonderful people. But let me just take privilege. When we're in spaces and we talk about our trans community, it is important that we honor those trans warriors who have gone on. And to speak names of Sylvie Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, Stormy, Avis Pendarvis, Crystal LaBeija, Angie Extravaganza, Pepper LaBeija, Portia LaBeija, Tracy Ebony, Puffy Ebony, Mimi Ebony. So many trans women, Roberta Baldwin, Tina Teasley. So many amazing trans women, names that you will never know, who were groundbreaking and daring and bold and fearless. These women and men created safe spaces, whether it was through ballroom or whether it was through political or activism. These trans folks created spaces, some on film, some on television, some by just being existence. And folks, when we talk about people and those folks who were brave and fearless, we forget that pride is just not a party. It was out of protests and out of resilient trans women and men who were tired of being tired, and through a brick and a movement came forth. So we're in the eve of Capitol Pride in DC. As we came off of Trans Pride, as we came off of Black Pride, we go into District Pride June 29th at the historical Lincoln Theater. We go into Senior Pride at the Whitman Walker at the corner. We go into Latinx Pride and Youth Pride, and many of those I'm hosting. I'm the queen of the shameless plug. And if you want to know more about me, if you're viewing this now, go to racine.com. That's RAYCEEN. I believe in plugging everything I do, because sometimes folks don't want us to take up space. And I'm so grateful that we're able to take up space. In my lifetime, I remember when this was built, and they're celebrating 50 years. 50 years. So that's telling you I've got a lot of history under my belt. And I'm so grateful that I'm still in spaces where I'm invited and they welcome me and the doors are open and I sit with the next generation. And what a blessing it is to be in spaces like this as we honor and celebrate the dash in between, the young and old, and understanding that we all are so powerful at what we do. So let me just take a few questions from people. I'm gonna stand up like I'm gonna have an Oprah moment. I love you more. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, come here, my beloved. Come here. This is one of the most wonderful, amazing. Come up here. I am so good. I didn't see you. This is such a groundbreaking individual, a groundbreaking comedian, Washington, D.C.'s own. If you don't know who this woman is, she has graced so many stages. She uses comedy to educate, inspire, and move and motivate us. I love you. If they don't know who you are, tell them who you are.
I'm Robin Montague. I've been representing D.C. and Hollywood for my entire career. So yeah. Currently, I'm writing on the Sherri Shepherd show, freelancing as well. You know, and it's really great to see her in the morning, just, you know, say the stuff that she don't say it right, but she does.
Give her a round of applause. I love her. You never know who you're sharing spaces with. But honey, I love you. I love you more than life itself. From the first time I met you, I just felt like this is my DC sister child. We gonna connect. And let me just take a few questions. Yes, my beloved. We have a mic. Yes. Hold it a little closer so we can hear you. You have one of those quiet storm voices.
Yeah, you know, I will say that it's similar to us as Black folks, and when you watching something, you be like, you can't articulate it, but you feel it, right? When you watching a movie and you know the Black woman just go to bed and she don't got nothing on her hair, a Black person ain't wrote that. Cause we gonna have a silk pillowcase or a bonnet or a head wrap or a do-rag or something, right? So for me, when it comes to trans images, it's very similar to that, right? It's about the gaze that the camera is doing, right? Because trans people, for example, our relationships to our bodies are often different than cisgender people. And so when you look at a film like Lingua Franca, which is directed by, I believe she's Filipina trans woman, you can see how the camera just treats the body differently because she's cognizant of some of those things, right? So it's often, you can't, it's often tough for me to articulate it, but it's a feeling, right? I think similar in the ways that when we're watching certain Black stuff, you be like, ooh, a white person who think they know Black people wrote that, right? Or a certain type of Black person wrote that. You know, it's one of those types of things, for me at least. Thank you.
Those little nuances, like the nuance in How to Get Away with Murder when Viola takes off the makeup.
Yes.
And the wig.
Yes.
That was very real.
Yes.
That was a very real moment. And I still, and there's another moment that I knew that whoever wrote this was definitely a person of color. The scene in Betsy where Queen Latifah is coming off a stage and she's sitting and she's nude at the mirror and she's having this moment that only sisters know. in that moment of your nudeness and your vulnerability and embracing and just she had a moment. It was like, I'm a big girl, I'm in the mirror, and I'm bold, and I'm nude, but I'm still beautiful. And that was such a powerful moment that resonated in my spirit because as performers or writers, we know that sometimes we shed. And when we come off a stage, we shed and we get nude, whether that's physical or spiritual. We have a moment where we need a moment to get real and just let the shedding of the layers and all that we take. Because when you get on stage or you write or you perform, that's some armor. That's heavy. You putting on the armor, and then you got to prepare yourself for folks when they throwing darts at you sometimes because they're not very nice.
Okay.
So you got to have your armor together. But any more questions? Yes, my beloved. Another wonderful, amazing individual. Put your hands together for Killius Clark. Someone who is a writer, an activist, an MC, a playwright, a new author. Look, see that tight?
So I wanted to ask this, because I wrote my book during the pandemic as well. And when you ask someone what was one of the hardest things about writing your book, many times you hear writer's block or you might hear other things. I know for me, something that I did not anticipate was writing something like a whole thing, maybe a whole chapter, maybe a whole thing, and then going back and reading it and being like, I don't like this. I did not like this. What was I even thinking? What was it giving? And you get rid of it and do it all over again. Did you have any of those moments? And what was the hardest part for you in creating this project?
So I didn't have any of those moments, but only because of my writing style. Okay, I'm the type of writer where I can't go to the second sentence if the first sentence ain't right. I will stare at that page for 7 days until that first sentence is right, and like, if any of you are into audiobooks, I narrate the audiobook as well. And so you can hear, like, for me, rhythm is a very important thing when I'm writing sentences. I think, deeply Black thing to be worried about the rhythm of a sentence. But rhythm is important for me. And so because of that writing style, I didn't have much like going back and being like, oh, this is horrible. Now, I did write when I finished the entire book and, you send it off to edits from the editor and then you're rereading it as you're doing the edits. It's like, you wrote that like that? I used to like it. And so, you make little tweaks. I would say the hardest part for me was the centering of myself in the book. Every chapter starts with a personal story of some sort that leads us into the discussion point of that chapter. And as a journalist, we are just so often told that we are not the story. And interestingly enough, the work that I've done the most that I love and I've taken great joy in is the stuff that grows out of my own personal experience. But doing that for a book that I had sold off of the strength of my reporting on the industry or whatever was a challenge. Now I got over it, but it was just difficult to try to basically judge my own story as worthy, right, alongside some of the narratives that I was talking about in the book. But I was worthy too, and so I put it in there. Thank you.
I love you for it. Anyone else, my beloved? All right, we have two in the front. I'll take our African queen.
So I really am happy to see this book because I am an educator and I really think this is something that will be good for media studies to assign to students to read, and it's coming at the right time. So how would you like for educators to use your book? What is the thing that you want the younger audiences to learn about Black trans representation in media?
Love this question. So after every chapter in the book is a viewing guide. It's a collection of some films and shows that I talk about in the book, articles, YouTube videos that I talk about in the book, some that I don't, that I think serve as like a companion for this book. You know, I like to tell people that you're going to do a little work with this book, okay? I don't explain a lot of things. I explain some things, but I don't explain a lot of things on purpose because y'all need to do some work, right? When it comes to how you show up for us as trans people and as Black people. And so I would say the education piece, the films and the shows in there are in there for a reason, right? Like use them as jumping off points, right? With your class or with, you know, your community, do a book club or whatever. And I did that because when I was in school, I went to Morehouse for undergrad. I went to Stanford for grad school. But when I was at Morehouse, I took a sociology course, sociology of film, I think it was called. And that was kind of the beginning of me being able to like look at our cultural productions with like a critical eye. Still enjoy them, but look at them with a critical eye. And so I would offer that. And then I'm very much so into ways that trans folks are creating our own now, right? So many of the projects that are in here aren't created by trans people, which I talk about in the book. But now with all these various different platforms, right? Like I'm so fascinated by all the trans kids who are on TikTok, you know, just documenting their lives in various ways and like creating real culture, right, in this particular moment. And so I would offer up how can one use, you know, the culture productions that are in progress right now also in service of this education.
I love
That's
it.
helpful. Thank you.
I love it. I feel like you two are going to connect and you're going to invite our beloved to your school and it's going to be more the
Please.
continuation part
Absolutely.
two. Look, see that. That's how we're going to bring that together. Oh, and please have me moderate. Look, see that. Shameless plug.
Thank you so much for this book, Trans-Alt. My question is about trans folks behind the camera.
Mhm.
If there are any names or folks you want to lift up that are trans producers or writers or directors or anybody that's particularly sparking your interest right now that we should follow.
Absolutely. Thank you for this opportunity. Fatima Jamal is a model, filmmaker, Black trans woman who I attended Morehouse College with. She's been working on a documentary called No Fats, No Femmes for a little minute. I'm excited to see how that shows up in the world, discussing her experience as a Black trans woman, as a fat Black trans woman, to be specific. Looking forward to that. Aya Simone is a fabulous harpist and also a filmmaker and creative. She has a series called, what is the name of that series?
It's coming. I can feel it. It's coming.
I'm gonna look it up while I talk about her.
Yeah.
But it's a fabulous series starring herself and a group of other Black trans women from Detroit. And it's like a kind of a Living Single-esque type show centering Black trans women. And it's fabulous and it's hilarious and it's wonderful. I'm gonna find that name for you. So I would offer her up. I would also offer up D-Lo, D''Lo. They are a trans masculine person, comedian. They have a one-person show that they've been doing and touring around for a little minute. Wonderful comedic actor in particular. So many folks. I will say on this point, a lot of trans folks are trying to create their art, but don't have the institutional support to do so. I think of someone like Trace Lysette, who's currently in a movie called Monica that you should check out. A beautiful, beautiful, beautiful film. She's a trans actress. She's not Black, but she is a trans actress who's been doing great work for a little minute right now. And she talks about how with their film, they struggled after getting an 11.5-minute standing ovation at the Venice Film Festival, one of the oldest film festivals in this world. Right? For those of you who don't know, standing ovations is a way to like determine like, oh, this movie is really good. It was 11.5 minutes. And after that festival, they did not have distribution. They eventually got distribution, but did not have enough money to pay for marketing and PR. And so she had to She did a GoFundMe to raise enough money for her film to have representation so that people would start talking about it, right? And it's interesting for her as a trans woman who's been in this industry for a little minute, working her way up. She was in Hustlers with J-Lo. She was on David Makes Man on the Oprah Winfrey Network. To get an 11.5-minute standing ovation and then have to struggle to get your movie out. That's wild to say we've come so far
How
as
about
an
that?
industry.
It speaks to the volume of where folks are, oh God, we give you space, but not too much space. But speaking of another film that it just brought to my attention while you're looking that information up, there's a film that a few amazing trans women tell their story. And it was a small film, but now it's going to be on HBO Max, and it's called Stroll. And it's premiering this month. So please check it out. And when I tell you, it tells some powerful stories of women and their survival skills of being trans women and black women, especially maneuvering
The
through
Stroll
this
is
world.
so good. The Stroll is so good. Co-directed by a white trans woman and a black trans woman. Kristen Lavelle is the black trans woman. White woman's name's gonna slip me, and they're gonna get me for it, but she'll be fine. The name of the series that I talked about is Femme Queen Chronicles. Femme Queen Chronicles. You can watch. It's a like 10-minute episodes online. It's so good. And then also, in addition to The Stroll, in July, there's a movie coming out called Kokomo City. It's a documentary, also directed by a black trans woman, Dee Smith. And that movie, love The Stroll. The Stroll is very, academic, but also innovative in a lot of ways. Really good. It's about the women who survived the meatpacking district, The Stroll, as it was called back in the day. But Kokomo City, for the black folks, is about the relationship between black trans women and black people. And that movie, my God, today, July, in the movie theaters. Go see that.
How about that? And we're going to take our final question, and then we're going to go let you maneuver over to the table so people can have more time for you. By the way, I'm just loving your ode to Tina Turner in these legs. Can I just tell you,
Thank
honey,
you so much.
we were coming, we were driving around the corner, and I saw Travell in this black skirt. And I said, who is that giving me Tina Turner? What's love got to do with it? And I said, oh, that's Miss Travell.
Yes, honey.
To our final question to this young man here.
Good evening. My name is Joseph, pronouns of they, them. I am a non-binary butch queen of trans descent.
Period.
And I'm also hashtag FanTap.
Period. That's my podcast, in case y'all didn't know.
Two-part question, and it is in regards to polls, because a lot of the rub that came up in regards to polls, at least the rub that I heard in my community among my folks, were one, it seemed very colorist in that all the villains seemed to be dark-skinned and all the good characters seemed to be light-skinned. And then, like, within the real-life interactions around polls, for some of my folks, myself included, felt like Billy Porter showed up in ways that were dismissive to the trans actresses on the show and kind of took up a lot of space as his star started to finally rise, and well-deserved, but ultimately, like, whenever he would be asked about, well, why haven't your trans colleagues kind of been able to get that same level of shine? He would kind of give these answers that could kind of come off as like dismissive. Kind of like, well, I had to wait, so now they can wait. So my question, because I do have a question, is, as much as you're comfortable sharing, kind of like what were your thoughts, kind of like around those moments?
Yeah, no, it's in the book. It's in the book. There's a whole chapter about Pose specifically. And I do talk about the ways in which we saw broader Hollywood, right, select the black gay man to give all of this adulation and adoration to. And it took a long time for the black trans women and brown trans women and people who were supposed to be the center of that narrative to get their due. Super glad that Michaela J. Rodriguez got that Golden Globe win, but that was during the pandemic. She ain't get no TV show. We ain't get no speech, whatever. And so I think one of the things I do in the book with a lot of cultural productions is wrestle with their complexities. And I think oftentimes we want to do away with something because it has an energy or something of it is problematic. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we just say, not going to engage with that because, it was colorist, or not going to engage with it because, all of those trans women were still sex workers. Most of them were still sex workers. For me, it's a lot more interesting of a conversation to say, okay, yes, there's all these different stereotypes here, or yes, there's all these problems here, but also let's wrestle with what it allegedly did positively for the community. And in the book, I offer some thoughts about whether or not Pose pushed us to this promised land in the ways that it was promised to do, teasing out some of the colorism, teasing out some of the broader anti-blackness, because y'all remember the first season, it was really about, the non-black people. If you remember the first season, now you thinking of season 2 and season 3 when they got rid of the white folk, okay? But that first season, anyway, it's in the book. But I love Pose. I rewatch Pose now, right? Because I think there is so much good there. But even the good things, deserve some critique as well. And I think on the Billy point specifically, I do think that's a complex conversation, right? Because he himself has been done dirty by this industry, right? And he wanted his fucking moment that he was due, right? And he absolutely was due it. I think now he articulates himself a little bit, better as to not, seem like he is putting down his co-stars while lifting himself up. And I think we, give a little grace to him because, everybody learning. But I do talk about that particular moment and how it impacted, I think, the broader community discussion. Thank you for your question. Thank you for listening to Fanti.
Thank you. Put your hands together for this amazing Tre'vell Anderson. Oh, child.
Thank y'all so much
my goodness.
for coming.
And Tre'vell will be over there to, I had the whole time I was looking for a clock, and there it is up there in the air. Child, I was trying to check time, but we're doing good.
We're wonderful.
So let's pose for the camera.